All right, we are live. Welcome to Cloud Talk on this July 2nd, 2015. I am Brian Fanzo, known as iSocial Fans. I am in sunny, actually not sunny San Diego, rainy San Diego, as I am doing a couple gigs here. And as always, joined by my co-host, Daniel Newman. It might actually be more sunny where you are in Chicago. How are you doing, Daniel?
Good. That rain dance I've been doing for the sake of Southern California is starting to work. I'm actually really glad to hear that. So, being the 2nd of July, and for all of our domestic listeners, it's right before the 4th of July holiday. So, an early happy 4th to everybody out there. Go see some fireworks. We're hoping to put some fireworks on today as we talk a little bit, get back to data, one of our absolute favorite topics. And just before I jump into the meat and we start talking serious cloud and data and everything, wanted to say congratulations to the U.S. women on going to the Women's World Cup Finals. It's a little personal jab, and I know us tech talk people may not be thinking about Women's World Cup, but as a father of two daughters who are both aspiring soccer stars, I am super excited for the 5th of July when USA plays Japan in a rematch for the World Cup champions. So nobody say USA can't play soccer. It's just the men. So anyways, what's going on over there, Brian?
No, that's awesome. No, for sure. And those that are tuning in, we are live on Meerkat, Periscope, Google Hangout, YouTube, and every other Omni channel that exists. We are using the hashtag Cloud Talk on Twitter. You can join in the conversation. We'll be putting the questions out there on Cloud Talk as well. And we want to thank our sponsor, Pivot Point. If you guys check out millennialceo.com/Cloud Talk, you can check out all of our previous episodes, some of the blog posts around these topics, and really, this is exciting. We do this every single Thursday at noon Eastern time, 9 a.m. Pacific, and we embrace, the mobile aspect. Often one of us are on the road, if not both of us. And today I'm in San Diego. I was here for Social Media Day and then a couple other events that are going on. And a big conversation was definitely around a topic that we're actually talking about here on Cloud Talk. And I actually think that's actually a good example and a good sign of what has changed. Really the power of data. And now data, I think data conversation is changing. It's changing for the C-suite. It's changing, I think, for all businesses in all aspects. So today's topic is really, how is data impacting the C-suite and businesses today? And I think that is, that is truly something we have to kind of look at and embrace and really understand a little bit better. But to start this off, Daniel, I'm curious from your perspective, and this is something I was kind of thinking of, especially even in the social media day space that I was here on Tuesday. I was talking about live streaming and the data that comes off of that. But are we? Let's kick off question number one. I'll throw it out there to the Twitters. But is big data still a big data problem, or are we crossing a threshold and it's now a big data competitive advantage for those that actually can take advantage of that, especially in the C-suite?
I think the answer is yes. I think you actually asked, it's kind of two questions and they're good. It's a good question, but I think, yes, there still is a huge big data problem, because until you can truly say about your company that you are answering all your questions using data and quantifying that data, then qualifying it and actually having it guide your decisions, you have a problem. Because right now there really is very few things that we cannot do via data. And even you and I, right, who are data geeks, we're tech geeks, we're tools geeks, we don't necessarily use the data every time to optimize everything we do. So a simple example out there for people who are like in social media, right? You and I like Buffer, right? And when you use Buffer, you can go in there and it gives you analytics and it'll tell you your top performing content on social. So you go in there and it tells you what's top performing, and logically you should look at that and that should shape all the content you share going forward. But that doesn't necessarily, from a data standpoint, shape what you do going forward. There's still a lot of sort of what I would say subjective things we'll choose to share and post. There's gut feel, things we like, things that don't necessarily resonate with our audience. But if we listen to the data, it would perfect it. Now, we as personal, consumers of social may be different than, say, a brand that's using social. But a brand, for instance, would want to be looking at that data and very strategically using it to decide what it puts out there. And that's an example that's probably near and dear to all our people out there on the Twitters. And of course, there's so many other areas that big data can play a role: finance, operations, customer service, response times. But the bottom line of it is, yeah, I think it's a problem, right? Because until we basically say we're using all the data available to us to solve all of our biggest business problems, we still aren't maximizing data. So therefore, it's a problem. Now, quickly to flip, and I'm sure you've got a lot of ideas here too, Brian, but from an advantage standpoint, I would say absolutely. So what if you go back to that same example I just gave about utilization of data, the fact that we use tools that tell us what's performing well, and then we use that to optimize and choose what we share going forward is an example of how we're using data to get an advantage. Now, there's varying levels of rudimentary data. Someone may not look at a cross section of a lot of content. So they're just looking at one and saying, well, this particular thing did really well, and that becomes their data. So making it a competitive advantage comes down to not just using data and not just putting it to work, but it's qualifying it, quantifying it, and having people look at it that actually know what the heck they're making out of that data.
Oh, that's a good point. I think actually that's probably what the in my opinion, like the biggest answer right now is it's the difference between a big data problem. Usually, I think in my opinion now comes from someone that doesn't understand the power of it, and it really hasn't hired the right people to manage it and embrace it. And the people that are looking at big data as a competitive advantage are putting a data scientist in each one of their departments. They're creating a center of excellence that has data scientists that are implementing different solutions, company wide without the limitations of silos and company problems. I think as we merge more and we try to understand more of what this big data solution looks like, I think one of the things that we are really going to see is that the more companies that are hiring data skill sets into every single department, the more successful ultimately all of these companies are going to be at handling the data.
Yeah, I think that, you bring up a couple of really, really good points, but I think you can't really articulate enough just how big of a problem data is. Now, for businesses, I shared this yesterday, and it's funny because I think businesses still largely ignore information that's highly valuable to them. There was a post, I think it's like the Global Research Center for Digital Business Transformation. I read an article about our friend Tim Hughes shared it, and it said something along the lines of that 4 in 10 incumbent businesses in the next 5 years will be gone. Incumbent businesses in their industries will be gone because of a failure to digitally transform. Now, this is research, this is data, and this is information, and that's huge. You think the Blockbusters, Kodaks, companies that were huge and then just vanished all of a sudden. Well, take that down to the micro level of every industry and every business. Now, all of a sudden, that's a huge data point. Now, what does a company do when they see that data? So that's an example of a very high level macro data point that a company needs to now drill into and say, well, what are we doing to get ready? But that's information. So data can be it can be a guide to say, hey, we need to explore the problems and the challenges of our business. And then there's that second layer of data, like, okay, our data says that 76% of our customers are satisfied with their experience with us. Well, you could look at that and say that's okay, or you may look at that and say that's really bad. Now, then all of a sudden you have cross sections, you have industry cross sections. How is other companies in our industry performing in terms of customer satisfaction? How is the global of all businesses looking? The H2H standpoint of it, of what customer satisfaction should look like. And then you might say, well, we want to reach 90% because if we reach 90%, it's going to increase our customer retention by 20%. Okay. My point is, so data can be kind of predictive in the sense, we talked about predictive and prescriptive, but that first data point I gave you is a predictive data point. It's telling you something that you as a business is going to have to look at and go, holy crap, in 5 years, my business might be gone if we don't change and start taking advantage of big data, social, mobile, all the things we like to talk about. And then that second piece of data might be, our business is not meeting industry expectations for customer service. This is something like prescriptive that we need to work on if we want to retain customers, increase profit margins, keep our employees happier. So there's both sides of it. And that's a huge problem. But if you're using that to guide your decision making, it is inherently creating a competitive advantage.
Yeah, and I'm pulling a couple of comments from Twitter because I agree. And a friend and a previous guest, Tim Crawford, said theoretically big data is a big thing. In reality, the use of it is challenged in multiple ways. And then Alan Berkson said, it's not about the data, big or otherwise. So much of it is about the questions, which I think is always an interesting one. And to kind of piggyback on that, Ursula and Tim were going back and forth on Twitter, and they said, it's more than just employing a data scientist. It's how to use them is critical. And I think that is something that is super, super important across the board. That is something we can't really underestimate when it comes to, hiring someone or putting someone in that role, but without empowering them, without giving them the tools, and really without trusting them to not only implement something, but here's a funny one. I think a lot of people are leveraging the data, getting the data, doing it the right way, but they're not using the data and acting on it because it scares the crap out of them, because the data is probably telling them something that they weren't expecting to hear. And that really does scare a lot of these companies and a lot of these brands, because the data, if it's done correctly and implemented correctly, oftentimes will provide insights that maybe you never had access to before. So no, I think there's lots of great points. I love all the comments on Twitter, so we'll keep that going as those conversations go. So there was in this one of the blog posts we were reading about the topic, the idea of automation, and really where automated data comes into the fact of us being able to take this data and get more access with less work from like a C-suite perspective. So question number 2, how has data automation impacted the use of data for leaders today?
Well, I think just yesterday, you and I simultaneously discovered an article about how big data is going to forever change the role of the CMO, right? I think you and I were like literally emails crossing in space as you and I, probably from the same source on LinkedIn, saw the article and we're like, boom, we've got to talk about this. So that's really funny because that's automation, and that's a good example of intelligent feeds. Our feeds on all of our social channels now tell us what we like to hear, and you and I have so many similar interests that we get similar content put in front of us on that network at the same time. That's kind of a very, very unique example of it. But I think the biggest key is that we've always had data. So it goes back to that comment, that Tim and Ursula were having and talking about asking questions. Big data is all about asking good questions and then using data to help solve the problems. Now, data now allows us to actually identify better questions, because before it was sort of, we'd get a gut question like, if you're into finance, you might say, well, what is our trend in profitability over the last 6 months? Well, you could go into your accounting package. That's always been there, and see what your profitability, which customers are most profitable, which customers are least profitable, right? Where business has grown, where it's fallen off. That always existed, so long as you knew what to query. But now, the big data, the data automation is actually saying, here are, 10 strategic business KPIs that we want to understand. We want to understand customer wait time and its relationship to profitability. So as our customer wait time on hold went up 1 minute, how did our profit perform during that same period? And then you start looking to create links, and that data is being fed to you automatically on a regular basis. So if you're a CMO and your responsibility is increasing performance, sales performance of new products through your marketing efforts, you might be able to directly say, so as we increase the amount of content that we put out there, we write X number of white papers and case studies, and as we grew that by 20%, did revenue in the subsequent quarter go up? And you start looking for links, and you can actually schedule that kind of data to be fed to you. That never existed before. So now what's happening is data is actually implying and implicitly providing information to CMOs or business leaders, C-level leaders, that they don't have to necessarily go out and ask for that information, Brian. They get that information fed to them, which allows them to, instead of querying and sifting through data, to have information that allows them to ask a second and third layer of better questions to provide better leadership.
No, and I think that kind of also goes into that idea where real-time data is super important, but data presented to you at the right time so that you can make the right decision is the game changer, right? If you're getting real-time data, but yet it's not presented to you in a way that you could actually act on it and provide real-time results, why the hell is that valuable? I was talking to somebody in the restaurant industry and then someone at the hotel industry here in San Diego this week, and they were talking about, they have all this data, they're getting all the information, but majority of it is getting fed to them what they considered the next operating day, right? So they get it in an actionable form at 8 a.m. the next day. But if someone is complaining on, let's say, social media, or they have all these different variables and they realize their servers are down, but they don't get that information presented to them in a way that they can, activate a backup server or activate another protocol until the next morning at 9 a.m., is it even valuable at that point, right? And someone was even making the analogy of, if all of a sudden we knew something was down across the board, we could really truly make a really great decision. But if it's not automated and presented to us to the right people, and one of my examples was I worked, for a data center company, and we had a software that allowed us to track storms coming in across the nation. And if a storm was coming into one of our data centers, where our data center was, we had real-time actionable data that actually was presented to every one of the people on the ground. And if that storm came to a point where we had to make a decision, it was actually automated that all of the loads would switch from one data center to the other based on the software determining that the risk versus reward, the risk of that server, that data center going down was so great that we had to switch the data load, even if it would have caused some issues for our customers. And that's relying not only trusting data, but you have to trust that your software is not going to all of a sudden get a glitch and, because it was a cloudy day, all of a sudden switch all of your data load from one data center to the other. So I think, not only does, you can't fix stupid with data. Data is going to oftentimes there's going to be glitches and automation can sometimes go awry. But I think it's important for us to understand and remember, like you were saying, automation is key in an element where we have to be, data has to be presented in an actionable form for us to truly take competitive and responsible decisions at the right time.
Yeah, and Brandon out there says, he's agreeing with you right now, Brian, but he says it's hard for specialists to explain reports to the C-level. So he mentions training is needed. I figured that might be something that hits you near and dear to your heart.
Oh, it does, big time. It is definitely one of those things for me. I think when we talk, especially across data, we talk about data, we talk about tools. When you get a new tool in, everyone gets trained on it on day one. Well, majority of the time, the company itself doesn't even know how to use the tool. And let's talk about it truthfully. Enterprise companies buy a tool because they think they know what they want to do with it, but then they really try to morph that tool into doing something else, right? And if companies aren't training their employees continually, and they're not leveraging, in my opinion, social business and collaboration tools to make training a full-time, integrated part of the culture, and if training is still stuck as a one-time event or a yearly certification, I don't think you'll ever embrace data to make real-time decisions, because not only do the tools change, but the types of data change, and really the types of actions that we can take on data has changed. And then you factor in something like, virtual reality, or let's talk about, iBeacons. I love beacon technology. I mean, I have on me right now, I have a watch, a Pebble, and a Jawbone. If you all were somewhere deploying that where you're getting more information from your employees, the training aspect cannot be underestimated. There's an Apple Watch right there.
My first wearable, Brian.
I know, I'm proud of you.
I went slow, but I got there, and when I did, I went all in. Right? I didn't cut any corners here. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point. And one more great comment from our friend Tim was he said automation equals autopilot, which is another interesting, he didn't really imply whether or not that was a negative or a positive, but I think one of the things we do have to be very careful with is that there is still the strategic level of interaction with data. So big data and the automation and the information it provides does not stop us from using our intellect to let that drive us to the next layer of questions. And because that's the biggest thing is we get a piece of data and we sometimes will blindly make a connection. So we talked about how data can be used to connect two things. Like you could say, okay, we decreased our wait time on customer service and our sales went up, or our customer satisfaction went up. But there might be 15 other things that happened in that same month that you're going to have to look at and say, well, we also rolled out a new marketing campaign. We also, hired 3 new people. We also changed our CFO. We also and that's the problem is data leaves a lot of variables. So if you study statistics, right? Statistics would have told you that you can't have multiple X and Y variables. You have to have one variable that you change, or else the experiment doesn't really work. So data is sometimes looking at multiple factors, but you're trying to correlate it to one thing and make a decision around. So there has to be a certain amount of intuition that continues to be utilized, because data can't answer everything, but it certainly can get us a little bit closer to knowing why certain performances are happening within our businesses.
Yeah, and I'm going to pull in Susan Reynolds on Twitter said, and this is a really cool thing, in my opinion. I think more companies have to, kudos to Susan's company, because she said, seeing our customers with using visualization tools and lets people who don't want to be data scientists use data in their roles. And I think that's something that can't, I mean, we don't have that as a question today, but I think data visualization, not only presenting it in a consumable form, but actually customizing the visualization of the data based on who's reading it and what the action is they're going to take. I can't stand when I see a tool that says, this is the data visualization button or visualize the data, because depending on what type of data it is and who's reading it really would dictate what that data visualization should look like. And so hearing things like that, where she's saying, it's letting people make, they don't have to be a data scientist to make actions. That is essential. But that same company probably hopefully has a data scientist deciding what visualizations they're using and where that's being presented. Because I think that's something that we sometimes make a mistake on, is we're presenting a visualization. I mean, imagine this. This is one. If I presented to my team that I had at my last company, if I gave my CEO the same dashboard visualization as I was giving my on-com tech or my software team, he would look at me like I was crazy, because there's not one action on that visualization that he could do. But if I gave him a customized dashboard with his own icons, with his own features, he was able to even use his own terminology. That's where data can really be powerful. So Susan, thank you for that comment. That was a really good tweet on really the importance of visualization. And Alan Berkshire, and there's lots of people agreeing now with the key for visualization across the board.
Yeah, I almost put them two in a bucket together, and I shouldn't. It's a mistake. But that big data has to be visualized, meaning data visualization is actually what makes big data work, right? Just putting a lot of data in front of people, it's just like a long email, right? How do you respond to a 2-page long email versus 5 bullet points, and which one gets more productivity out of it? I would say, without even having to do a data experiment, I could tell you which one works. Well, visualization is much the same. Like, our ERP systems, our CRM systems, what are the 5 things that it could tell the salesperson, the sales manager, the customer service representative, the CMO, that they can actually use for actionable business decisions? Because the problem is again, it's too much. The reason it's called big data is probably because it's too much data. And it goes back to that post, that I wrote a long time ago about little data. It goes back to that other article we wrote about, that's can big data steer us wrong, which I think we actually did a cloud talk about a while back, which is, can we use data to basically tell us what we want to hear? And that's probably one of the biggest mistakes. And that's, automation can help that to some extent, but we tend to put the inputs in to get us the output we want. So if we want to think something's working, we will put the inputs in, ask us certain questions, and say, I want to be sure our social campaign is working. Well, I'm going to find the 7 data points that support that, and that's what I'm going to share. But I'm not going to share with you the 13 other data points I found that are showing that maybe we're not doing as well as we think. We could optimize more. It's not actually effective. We're not getting the ROI. So we tend to use data to tell us what we want, and that's one of the biggest mistakes, which actually answers question 1 and can be implied into question 2. So let me jump into question 3, though. So this is actually perfect. Let's flip it to the customer side. The customer parity, right? Customers now have access to more data than ever before. So customers having more information and parity being greater between the buyer and the seller, and more in the buyer's advantage. How are executives' decisions being made around that to keep the buyers coming back?
No, I think that's crazy important. I think, I like saying it. I think it's true. We for the longest time not only thought the buyer and the customer was stupid, but we always felt kind of as a enterprise or as a business or even as a leader that we had more data, we had better tools, we could present information in a way that we came across as a smarter expert in all situations. And I think that ball is changed. That game has changed now, where not only does a customer oftentimes have more data or maybe better data than us, but they're closer to the source. The distance between a CEO and the actual what's happening on the ground is extremely far, right? But the customer now is the one that's living there in the community, has the pain points. And even if it's, we're talking B2B here, a lot of the smaller partners, when you have these startups that are teaming up with the enterprises, that startup is going to have a much better handle and understanding about what is actually happening on the ground. And I think when we're talking about impacting executives' decisions, I think executives now have to find ways to actually not only take in the customer data, but trust the customer data. Because I think customer data before, we used to say, well, the customer doesn't know what they want. Well, now the customer might still not know what they want, but they have enough data and enough action points coming to them that they probably do have a really good idea or a much better idea than they used to have on what they want.
Our friends at SAP did a study about what the buyers want, and I think it was right at the 2014, 2015. So shout out to you, our friend Ursula, who's out there from SAP. But there was a data point in there, and I shared it in an article I wrote today. So the digital revolution is shifting the balance of power between buyers and sellers. And says there's 68% of buyers wait longer to initiate contact with vendors than they did 2 years ago, which I think we all kind of knew. But then it also said that 80% of buyers typically know what they want before they make contact with the vendor.
You say 80%?
80% of people know what they want by the time they make, so obviously this could be a little different in retail, B2B, every sector, industry, vertical, horizontal, et cetera could be unique. But at the same point, I look at those two data points and I say, one, it's a huge case for digital transformation. Two, this is a perfect example to answer your question about how does this impact executives' decisions today. Executives today have to be thinking about the fact that a large part of the process of a buyer's journey takes place without the brand, without the physical engagement of sales, customer service, operations, finance, deployment, whatever your particular company is selling. So a lot of it is that invisible sale. A little shout out to my friend Tom Martin, who wrote the book called The Invisible Sale. But there's a huge part of the journey that's going on. So data has to say, how are we keeping our customers engaged during this huge portion of the sale that they're not talking to our company?
Not only the idea of keeping the customers engaged, but I love that. I spoke at the San Diego tourism event on Monday here in San Diego to it was a really cool workshop they were doing on all the hotels and the service industries here in San Diego and how they will come together to really share social media expertise, but data and understand their customers better. And Mari Smith, one of the Facebook social media leaders, kicked off the event on Monday, and she was saying that it was something like people on Facebook now are even from a brand perspective are trying to increase their customer service response time to a less than 5 minutes after someone posts on Facebook on their page to replying to it, and what that requires for like a customer service and here presenting that information to the tourism group here, where they're like they're already struggling right now to adapt and solve someone's problem when they tweet into the hotel and say how do I check into a room and I have no towels, and being able to get all that data to the right person so they can act on it, but also so that hotel can then get it to the front desk so the front desk can send towels up without having too many action points. So I think not only respecting that the customer has a lot of data, but I think it's important to also remember when we're talking about these things, like you said, what that data is and how powerful that data is only changing, and it's increasing as we know it.
So I wrote this: your response time must be faster. Third chapter, new rules of customer engagement. Data point here. So I love that we're talking about this a little bit because it was they actually said 32% of people on social channels expect a response from any brand that they make contact with within 30 minutes. 42% it's within 2 hours, and 67% say within the same day. So example again of customer and brand disconnect. So with that data point, what is a brand doing? So an executive has to say, if this is the current buyer, this is the model of the buyer of today, what are we doing to make sure that customer complaints, customer requests, service are all being answered in a timely manner? What are we doing to make sure that we're at least addressing that vast majority, that 67%? Because again, there's other data points that talk about unhappy customers sharing more than happy customers. So I know we're kind of getting a little bit off the core topic of data in the C-suite, but this is actually from a business strategy level, a huge question mark. So these are useful data analytics, Brian, that are being put in the hands of executives today. And they're saying, what decision are you making? So if this is true, what are you doing in your business to make sure that your customers are being responded to in a timely manner? That's a very practical application of a big data question now being put into action by a C-suite.
Well, you know what? And I mean, the C-suite, I don't think it now is should be or feel like they are disconnected. Or I saw Tim Crawford put out there, automation does not equal autopilot. And I couldn't agree more. I even put a Facebook post yesterday of a really bad automated Twitter response that went out from a company, and it had : first name _ last name, because it was using the algorithms to auto post to Twitter. And I don't think we can't look at tools and automation as bad. It's bad users and probably tools that are making automation bad, but people that understand the power of it. But I also think from an executive perspective, they can't be disconnected from data. They have to feel part of the solution. And I wanted to pull in, Dustin Stout on Periscope said, automation without human oversight equals the Terminator. and I kind of think of that as well as, when you think about, rogue automation or rogue data. So I think a C-suite, an educated C-suite, where they understand the power of data, but they understand what tools their team is using and who maybe they need to go to is key. And so that kind of goes into for our next question. How is the skill sets and the requirements for someone that is in the executive changed because of data?
It's a great question. Now, one thing I'd like to interject a little question for the audience. So our friend Steven Caggiano, I think I say that right, but I've never actually heard him say it. So you can verify it. Did I say that right, Brian?
Yep, you said it right.
Okay. He goes, nobody wants data. They want the ability to make the best informed decisions. And I think that is one really interesting thing for guys like us who, it's sort of marketecture, right? My favorite word is marketecture right now. And it's because we put a lot of marketing around the idea of big data, confusion, right? So content becomes powerful, social, these kinds of events become very good for information. But the fact is I don't think anybody wakes up and is like, God, I can't wait to look at this data. I can't wait to look at that graph or spreadsheet or meme or infographic or whatever, the heck these big data marketers, whatever, are putting together for us today. What they're basically saying is, I want to make better decisions. I want to make more money. I want happier customers. I want my employees to like getting up and going to work. And so that's really what it comes down to is big data is really starting with asking those questions is, are my employees happy? Yes or no? And then the second question is, okay, they may be happy, but I want them to be happier. So what are 5 questions that I could pull from the data to see if my employees are happy, whether it comes down to the way they're paid, the way they take vacation, the hours they work, where they work, when they work, the tools they're giving, the training, the education. You see what I'm saying? And you can start layering into it. But nobody says in the morning, like, God, I can't wait to look at data. Sorry, a few people say that. There are probably a few people out there. But holistically speaking, I don't think people say that every day. So to go into how the skill sets requirements needed to be an executive change, I think the bottom line is an executive can no longer get away with just having a good intuition. I think there was a long period of time where that sort of gut feel could separate one from the next. I think that playing field has been leveled a little bit, where now that really sort of, inspiring, charismatic leader that just gets things can be put on a level playing field with someone who really just wants it bad enough and someone that's willing to do the work and gather the information. So, I don't know if there's an exact change in the skill set, but I think what's happened is no longer can C-suite leaders basically just work off intuition. A CMO can't just hope that they're creative and branding is popular. A CFO can no longer, make rash decisions about, making employee cuts or changing suppliers without having, a lot more information, because those decisions now can snowball and data can tell you what that effect may be.
Well, you know what? And another one that I think we can't talk about, how many times have businesses deployed a new tool, set up a new training, and you know what happens? The executive says, oh, I don't need to go to that training. Don't include me in that collaboration tool. I'll have my executive assistant come handle that. Or, that's not something I need to bother with. I don't have the time. And you know what? I think maybe that's a tweetable that ends up going out there. There is no way an executive today can say they don't have the time to better understand data and find out the training and be a part of the conversations for the data conversations, data training, data deployment, data management. They can't use I don't have the time as an excuse. I think that is something that we truly have to change when it comes to how people are really treating data. And, and another one I wanted to say, another one out there from Tim Crawford, not everything is a data problem. Sometimes the personal interaction is more important. And I agree. And I think that's actually something that is highlighted a lot is collaboration between the C-suite is an element of data. Think about it this way. I'm very aware of one company. I'm not going to throw them under the bus, but they bought a $65,000 tool in 4 different departments, all authorized by 4 different people in the C-suite. So the fact that each one of those people understood the power of data, yet they each bought the exact same tool. instead of going out and knowing what the other departments were buying and how they were leveraging data, they all purchased the same tool. Now, the fact that company sold them four pieces of the same tool instead of letting them just use their enterprise license across the board might be a whole different discussion. But I think collaboration in the C-suite must change. Training in the C-suite must change. And I think we also have to focus a little bit more on, I'm excited for the days where a more millennial generation, more millennial mindset focused C-suite starts happening, where people aren't looking at data and digital as something that they want to integrate. They're looking at data and digital as the way that we do business.
So let me ask you this though. So, Tim is just crushing it today, but he says not everything is a data problem. Sometimes the personal interaction is more appropriate. So are there points, Brian, in business where the data needs to be thrown out and it does become old-fashioned mano-a-mano discussion?
Well, I mean, I think for sure. And I think also, data without context is pretty useless, in my opinion. There's a lot of data that we can get, but if you don't have situational awareness, if you don't have context around what the data was, I can't stand when someone sends me something and I ask them for the dates of the reports or the dates that they gathered the data, and they go, I think it was the last 30 days. No thinking about it. Without knowing the exact parameters of that data has zero value to me. And I think that element is important, but I also think you can only get so much information from data, and then you do have to also collaborate. And I want to tell Tim Crawford that he is dropping too much knowledge. So I'm going to give him an open invitation for one of the Thursdays in July. Tim, if you're watching and listening right now, I know you're on Twitter doing it. We would love to have you on as a guest and maybe dive into the new C-suite role, because I know Tim is an advisor and consultant for CIOs, speaks at all the CIO events on really what the new CIO looks like, talking about the CDOs as well. So I would love to bring Tim on as a guest in July, kind of dive into this topic even further, because I feel like all I'm doing is retweeting all of Tim Crawford's tweets. So maybe that's a good sign that we need to have him on later on. But no, I agree that we can't do it without having the power of some human interaction.
Yeah, he's the virtual co-host today. He just put that out there. So thanks,
Yep.
buddy. Sometimes, we just have to admit when we're being outclassed, Brian.
Hey, and if I'm outclassed by Tim Crawford, I will tip my hat every day to that.
So, and Alan Berkson saying I need a better camera. I think it's probably a lighting problem, Alan. So, but maybe it's a data problem. I also think I've had to turn down my Google Hangouts sometimes in terms of bandwidth usage, because I found that a freezing Twitter chat Google Hangout is less cool than one with a little bit lower resolution. So to all you out there in the ethers, this Cloud Talk mobile thing, let's make some more bandwidth so we can do better live streaming. I think the data will tell you what needs to happen to make this possible. So yeah, but I think that was just a very, very good sort of segue, is because you and I are passionate, we're data geeks, we love tools, is that we cannot feel the need to eliminate the human condition, the human interaction, the way people feel, the emotions, the things that are not yet able to be incorporated into intelligence. So I know we're going there, and I know the movie Her, and people marrying their machines, and machine language is getting smarter. Our friends at IBM, Pivot Point, Watson, right? Watson gets to know you better as you provide more data to it. But the bottom line is that we still do have certain inherent human engagements that need to take place, and then the data can become a talking point, but shouldn't become the entire center. Like that data point I gave about the 4 in 10 companies succumbing to data transformation or digital transformation. If there's a couple ways you could look at that data point and just be like, oh no, we're screwed. 40% of companies in our business are going to go under. But I think the bottom line is, if you're even there and you're even reading this, you're probably ahead of the curve. And now it just comes down to, are we having regular conversations about getting ready for how the buyer's journey is changing, getting ready for how consumers are changing, for what tech is becoming available? If we're talking about it, we're probably ahead of the curve in any industry that we're in.
I think it's also a data problem when you're talking to your mute button. So I unmuted. Maybe it's a device problem. I have like 19 devices going on right now and sitting in a hotel lobby. So, but no, I also think that idea, and kind of what to Tim's point on a couple of these elements of data and the importance of human interaction and human engagement is, where do we get to a point? Where do we get to an element of where we're at in our daily roles, where people are now, it's not about how we're leveraging the data, but it's why and when, right? I mean, or I guess when and why we're using the data, because there's also elements where sometimes the data is going to tell the entire story, and other times, if you don't have the intuition, the data really has zero value. So I think that's something that we can't underestimate. And I want to pull in. We're on question 5 now, so we have about 20 minutes left. We're going to let the audience bring in any questions for question 6, so our last question. So bring in some of your questions that you guys would like to see. If you're on Periscope, you can throw up a question on there. I will do my best to catch that as well. So I would love to hear from a question perspective, what other things as far around the C-suite and big data that you guys want to hear. So when we're talking about the C-suite role, Daniel, I think for that question 5, what do you think about what role is going to be the most impacted because of data? Maybe this is a 2-part question. Which one's going to be has been the most impacted today, and which one will be the most impacted in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could kind of go from a then, there, and now. In the past, the CFO was always the data person. The data's always been there, and almost their job was data visualization, right? What did CFOs do? They took numbers, sales, performances, and they put it into something that everyone else could understand. So I think their role has actually probably been impacted the least, but it's not that they aren't doing more. It's just that they understood it better. They always knew how to use data to impact it. I think and this is a bias thing for me, and I don't know if I can give it one, but I think it's somewhere between the CO, SO, and MO that's the most impacted, the chief sales, marketing, and customer officers. And some companies, that's one person. Some companies, that's a few people. But the bottom line is that I think sales has long been driven, especially B2B, which is where my heart and soul is, has been driven in a channel, mentality of pushing information down through your channels from sales to buyer. And I just think that the information I just provided from that SAP report on sales is showing overwhelmingly that people want to consume differently. And since that's cross-industry, it basically means that marketers and sales leaders are more challenged than ever before to find ways to connect with buyers without necessarily knowing they're in the buying process with them. And if sales and revenue runs a company, you can't dismiss that. So I basically think that if the CMOs and leaders in sales and customer service aren't using data in a big way to change how they make decisions going forward, I think they're missing, 1, a big opportunity, and 2, they're taking a big risk of really disconnecting from their customers.
No, I agree. And Tim Crawford on the element of continuing to challenge it, which I absolutely love. Tim is providing great insight, and Tim, don't stop adding the insight. Everybody on Twitter, thanks. The Twitter feed today is popping with really bright individual people that are adding insights that I feel like I should just quote a lot of these tweets because it's so powerful. But he said, arguably, is there any role in the C-suite that isn't heavily impacted by data? And it's almost flipping on its head. Like, if we say which ones are the most, the question is probably more times than not all of them. So which roles are probably are less impacted by data than other ones? And I think maybe to your point, Daniel, what you were going into, I mean, I think maybe this whole, chief digital officer, chief data officer, and then we have, CMO, and we have the leader of sales. But I also think, human resources is another one, right? So where human resources kind of comes into how they're using social recruiting, how they're able to now, a paper resume, is that really the best way to actually get data from somebody to find out if you're going to hire them? Give me a break. The digital footprint that someone has today is dynamic, updated, and that is where someone should be looking for to hire someone and running background. So an HR, a hiring person, they truly have to be using data to scour the internet. I use social listening tools, for our company, for our podcast, for our chats, for my personal brand. And a company has to be doing that when they're trying to investigate somebody for hiring them. So I think even, in the HR department might be one that, yes, they use data for, some of the internal things, but even for like recruiting, I think the idea of leveraging data outside, some public data, some social data, some digital data to better understand their employees and their new hires is something that's going to increase as well. So yeah, I don't know if there is a role that isn't impacted in the C-suite.
Yeah, we both kind of took the easy route. I named 4 C-suite positions, and you just basically encompassed all C-suite positions. So sorry, everybody out there. I think maybe some of you, I see Brandon said that he emphatically said 1. He said the CMO. So Brandon, thank you for jumping in there and not following Brian, Tim, and I with naming everybody in the C-suite. But But, let me ask you a question, though, because we talk a lot about CMO, but we haven't really talked about the CEO. CEOs have long led companies based on a lot of posturing, politicking, their ability to basically kind of not look at any of the specific information and still influence, inspire, and provide the, charisma to an organization. Do you think people are going to continue to kind of allow that and get away with that? Or do you think in the future that CEOs are going to be accountable to actually learning and training themselves to use data more in their answers than just the political stances they often take?
Well, you know what? I think the entire concept of what a CEO does and who they are and the type of person that is a CEO is drastically changing, and I think that's an awesome thing. I think that when we get more women in the C-suite, we get more women in the CEO role, we get more people that aren't willing to fail, put more people that are willing to challenge. We talk about, Twitter has right now an open job for a CEO, and I think the next CEO of Twitter, if they have the policy, which is the old status quo, where they say, we have an open door policy, and if that means that I care about the community, I'm collaborating with my employees. If we have that kind of CEO, I don't see exciting times ahead for Twitter. But I think if you have one that's saying, hey, I don't even need an office, I want to be part of the community, I want to learn about what my people are actually using it. I would love to say that if someone is applying for the job of CEO of a company like Twitter and they've never sent a tweet, they shouldn't be able to apply. And that sounds like, but like, I'm thinking now, like, why are we not hiring our users? Why are we not empowering people that, have executive experience? I'm not saying because but I think knowledge and understanding of not only the tools, the industry, but also the use cases of the user. I think that's changing what the C-suite really looks like. And I think when we see the changing faces of the C-suite in the near future, I think that idea of what the CEO is willing to do, how they're going to leverage data, how they're going to be much more of a part of the damn decision process and not a talking head or a puppet. And that sounds like I'm calling them out, but I'm not.
Well, I think, the big enterprise CEO might start to look more like the small business founder again, where they are a little bit more accountable to things. And of course, I'm speaking in generalities, and there's going to be situations where that may never be the case. But, there's always the other side of this coin too, Brian, is that Wall Street and the data on Wall Street impacts their long and short-term decisions on how they act and what they talk about. Because Twitter, for instance, has a monetization problem. And everybody knows it, and the data would tell them that, and it's obvious. They also have a user adoption and user commitment problem. You've talked about this, why people that don't start on Twitter don't stay on Twitter, and they don't get it because the learning curve is too big. I read a quote yesterday that basically if you have to explain part of your user experience, then you haven't made it simple enough yet. You haven't made it good enough yet. So our friend Rachel Miller says data accessibility has spurred the creation of new C-suite roles that are most impacted. So, I kind of alluded to the CCO. You've sort of talked about HR, but there are a bunch of new C-suite roles. Somebody did say, Tim and Jim Carter mentioned the CDO, Chief Data Officer, or Chief Digital Officer. Obviously, there's a huge impact to that role if it's created, because data becomes the very, very core of that role. Do you see a CDO being every company role being equivalent to a CFO or COO for companies in the near future?
Yeah, I think I loved your idea when you kicked off the answer there, where you said it's going to be more of like a startup CEO, right? And what's the coolest thing about a startup CEO? Their distance between entry employee and their customer is shrunk. A CEO, and I'm going to go into the live streaming aspect because it's very easy for me to do this, to share an analogy here, is the CEO of Meerkat, which is a startup. That CEO, I can DM him on Twitter, I can text him, and I am just a user. The CEO of Periscope, or even because they're owned by Twitter, the CEO of Twitter is not going to reply to any one of my messages. The distance between the CEO of Periscope and me, the consumer, is far greater than the one between the startup, Meerkat, and me, the user. And I think that kind of same thing can kind of be segued across the board. And I want to, we talked about adding bringing in a question from the audience, and I have a great one from the audience. And this is from Shannon. Shannon says, how does the increase in access to competitor data, especially social data, shape decision-making by the C-suite? And man, this touches my heart. I love this question because I actually talked about this in my keynote on Monday on social selling, really being, there is no excuse for any executive, any role, any business, any department to say they don't know what their competitors are doing and they don't understand, they don't have enough feedback. I don't understand what all of that data is there. I've talked about it before. I use this example a lot, that I was able to understand our competitor by following people that they had in their company, and based on how many people joined a specific LinkedIn group allowed me to understand what company they were going to acquire for a new software tool. And that was just competitive listening, right? And competitive intelligence has been around forever. I mean, that role is something that I remember in college whenever someone explained that role to me when I was a business major. And I said, that's the job that I want. It's like a spy for a company, in the sense that you're gonna present all the data that your competitors are doing so you can make better actions. I think the social data, all the digital impressions, I think every digital action your competitor takes, you should be able to understand that. And that includes what they share, when they share, where their people are going. And let's not make it be shy either. Location services on devices. If someone's periscoping when they're in Europe, yet they didn't tell us they were going to Europe, let's figure out what event or what company is in Europe that your competitor might be going there to work with. I mean, the data can also sometimes be implied in those kinds of situations. So social intelligence, in my opinion, is a powerful weapon for brands that can embrace that data.
Yeah, competitive data is no question something that's widely available. And we haven't even touched on yet too is data security, right? So as we create more data, as our people, employees, the information about our companies, you mentioned that acquisition. I know exactly which one you're talking about. That's that acquisition that was made in say in the employee advocacy / social space. You could see it coming a mile away, because all of a sudden you would just see the whole flock. And it was before an announcement made. You saw a whole flock of people start to join these groups on social, and it's like, oh my God, that's about to happen. And then like a few days later, it got announced. But that's just listening, right? That's just social listening and intelligence. But we also now, data has opened a whole new responsibility too. So let's talk about who's impacted. The CIO or CSO, which we haven't even mentioned at all in this conversation, interestingly enough, is the chief information officer's got a huge burden on them now to secure and create privacy for intellectual property, and to make sure that laws are being followed, because it's a whole new set of laws being created, rules and laws being created for digital information, how it's being used, how it's being protected depending on your industry and your vertical, how long you have to keep your emails for. Does social commentary by an employee count or not count as a representative view of a company, depending on the role they have? So depending on the level they are in the company, what they tweet can become a legal issue if they're a publicly traded company. So there's a whole bunch of new rules and new regulations that our CIOs and everyone else in the C-suite also have to mention. So I really do think you hammered it home right away, Brian, when you said it, but I don't think there's a role in the C-suite that we can neglect to say is really, really burdened, and also provided with a great opportunity by what data can do for them.
Well, and let's be honest, it is idiotic for any company today to, who's the person in the company today that, conveys the brand story, understands customer service, shares their passion, is the original touch point of the company, right? That's the C-suite, right? There's an element of the C-suite, and you know who else does that? The social media manager. So these brands that hire an intern or hire someone that has no skill sets or understanding, yet you want them to do all of those same roles that you're asking the C-suite to do, convey your message, be the first touch point, be our customer service representative. Oh, but yeah, we're going to hire an intern that's going to be part-time, that's never been trained on that. I mean, I would love to, maybe this is my sales pitch to C-suite out there is, let me come in and teach you the power of social listening and enable you with the tools, automation, and reports that is presented to you in a way that you could consume it. And then it isn't a intern's social media manager coming up to you and saying, well, if you put this hashtag in on Twitter, that's social listening. No, I can give you every single touch point. I can tell you what links someone clicks on, what's their most popular website they browse. So I think social listening, social data, social intelligence, I think is something that completely underestimated. And I like Alan Berkson. He said social listening or competitive listening should be a new Olympic sport. I agree. I like that one.
And regarding your little sales pitch, Brian, I mean, let's just share it to the world, right? That is sort of what we do at Broadspeed Media Group. Is we consult and we amplify. We help the brands and we amplify for them. So little tiny sales pitch for ourselves, and I'll throw that out there. But that's what we do. I mean, we use tools. We use tools and we use information to help push the message of our stories and the brands we work with. So I think you kind of hit it on the head. And yeah, I'll say vote Brian for CEO of Twitter. If you get that role, man, I'll set you free, my friend.
Yeah, sign me up. I tell you what, sign me up. But no, and you know what? It's funny. It's funny even even in the role of the CEO, or like I would love. I think this is in this whole conversation, and really it goes to a lot of the discussions I've had with Tim Crawford offline before. Is that the geek is now cool. Steve Jobs made the geek cool. But I also think that Steve Jobs isn't the same CEO that we all want to every one of our companies. So the CEO, the role of the CEO, the role of the C-suite is not a one-size-fits-all for any one company, right? And I think you also have to look at it, like you said, you have other demands, you have other things that are pain points. But I question sometimes, why are some of these startups so talented, so crazy good at what they're doing? And sometimes their CEO has no experience, right? Their CEO is running, they trust their employees. They trust the people that are there. They're leveraging the data, but they also aren't afraid to fail fast. And I think maybe this is my my wish or hope is if we're both dads of daughters. So you gave a shout out to the Women's USA soccer team. I was telling my daughters that I would love for them to get a soccer scholarship or a hockey scholarship, since women's sports for those two are lots of college sponsorships out there. But I also think we're overlooking a lot of I think talented roles in females, as well as different diversity in the C-suite. So I think as the diversity gets in the C-suite, I hope that those people are also willing to fail fast, because just because someone's been hired outside of the box to be the CEO, when they come inside the box, all of a sudden they feel like they don't want to fail because they got this chance and they want to make it known, and they start acting like everything that they weren't before. And the reason they got hired was because they were willing to fail fast, and all of a sudden now they don't want to fail fast because they're afraid of losing this wonderful opportunity. I hope that changes. I hope that when we hire somebody because they are so great at failing fast with a strategy and knowing that they're going to have success, that we empower them to do the same thing when they get that job internally. And I think that is a struggle that we have across the board when it comes to the C-suite.
Well, our friend Ursula said, and may have just teed us up for a Smack Talk episode to be recorded soon. And it was companies may require personal accounts to be used for their corporate interests. And I said, I think we have an ethics conversation to be had on Smack Talk very, very soon. Is we want it. So employee advocacy says we want our employees to do it. Is it possible in today's digitally connected world? And here's another data problem and another reputation problem and a cloud problem. Should enterprises mandate? Can they mandate? Can they make their employees be social on their behalf as part of a job requirement from their personal accounts?
It's an interesting discussion. If they're an hourly employee, they can't. If they're an hourly employee and you want someone, you better be paying them for every hour they're doing it on their personal one, or you're in direct violation. So it might be a good Smack Talk in the very near future. So I love this conversation. Thank you everybody that's out there on Twitter. Such good information going across the board. And really that's something that we very important. I think, and I summarize this awesome talk today, and Tim, you're going to have a DM coming your way with a Thursday date that works this month. Come on as a guest on the camera. But I want to use Tim's last one here to summarize this awesome talk. He said, more important than failing fast is learning fast. But there's far more beyond that. And I agree. And I think that's something that we're learning as we go. I think everyone's kind of learning as we go. But I also think data is allowing us to learn at a pace that we probably never realized before. Therefore, if we are failing, we're able to use that data of why we failed, what we failed for, learn from it and be better at it, and then monitor the new data and understand. So I always say test, tweak, analyze, and then tweet, and then repeat. And I think that's kind of my idea of constantly innovating, constantly adjusting. So this was a fun topic, Daniel. So I will be heading to the airport after we get off here, but I will be actually in Virginia for Cloud Talk next week. But I think it's awesome that we were kind of bringing this conversation there. I hope everyone has an awesome 4th of July. And maybe watch real fireworks, not data or digital fireworks. Get outside and even Periscope the awesome fireworks. So Daniel, I'll give you kind of last words.
Brian, I'm gonna just log in, tune into your stream, because whatever you're doing is gonna be super interesting, and I can guarantee you'll be sharing it with everybody else. The most watched man on Periscope, so I love it. But no, I think you said about keep learning, fail fast, keep learning. I love that. I learned a lot today from you as always, Brian, and from our great community at Cloud Talk. So check us out, millennialceo.com/Cloud Talk. Tune into our podcast at Smack Talk, SMAC Talk, and the hashtag. Keep the conversation going here. And thank you to our friends at pivotpoint.io. Check out that blog. Great content for all you cloud and MSP lovers out there. And we will see you next week. Same time, same place. Brian, get your ass to the airport.
I'm out of here. Cheers.
See ya.